I'm an officer of the law.
I am the law. I am the law, mother.
Abraham Maslow was an American psychologist born in the early 1900s who attended the City College of New York after high school and later studied psychology at the University of Wisconsin, before extending and continuing his research at Columbia University. He was a behaviorist with a heavy focus on dominance and sexuality. Despite this, or maybe in tandem with this, many of the actions and conclusions he came to were and remain controversial, the biggest of which being the fact that he was a eugenicist, meaning he believed in the hierarchy of human value and selective breeding. He enjoyed Nietzsche and his concept of the Übermensch, or Superman in English, an idea that many eugenicists have clung to as a sort of final goal: to create, through sterilization, experimentation, and heavy breeding selection, a genetically superior human being. Maslow thought intelligence was genetic, and that IQ tests were a valid distinguishing factor in deciding human superiority. He criticized Jonas Salk for his work on the polio vaccine, as he believed it interfered with the natural order of life, and that disease was a form of natural selection. He also married his first cousin. He believed that psychedelics would help the elite humans, whoever those were, evolve into a new biological species. He founded I need to figure out how to say this word.
Upsychun.
No way.
Upsychun.
Upsychun. I don't believe that, but we're just gonna go with it. He founded Upsychism. Upsychism. He founded this word, a philosophy, or more accurately religion, that would reconceptualize every facet of human knowledge to create a better society, something he believed could be measured concretely, likely with the help of or as a result of those aforementioned psychedelics. Maslow was a huge figure in the psychological field, both positively and negatively, with more beliefs in history than I just listed. But the two things he is best remembered for, at least by non-experts, is the cognitive illustration known as Maslow's hammer and the theory of human motivation called Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Both of these ideas are really interesting and worth keeping in mind as we move forward here, but let's start with the hierarchy of needs. Maslow's hierarchy of needs is meant to illustrate the order by which humans have to prioritize their living conditions. To put it simply, it's impossible to focus on building relationships or creating art if you are starving to death. So eating food has to come before making friends if you want to maintain survival at the most basic level. However, once you've gotten food, water, shelter, and all those essentials taken care of, you can stop surviving and start living, adding new priorities after the other, building off each other. Most of the time, people like to represent this idea as a sort of 5-level pyramid, with each new level acting as a foundation upon which the next level can be built. The 5 layers from most critical to least critical are physiological needs, stuff like food, water, shelter, etc., stuff you'll die without access to after just a little while, safety needs, like a job or access to healthcare, love and belonging needs, so family, friends, community, etc., esteem needs, including stuff like status and freedom, and finally, self-actualization, the point where you've reached the peak of all that you can be, when you know who you are and what you want. This model has been pretty criticized for the way it seems to focus on Western ideas of culture and living. However, when put to the test in a number of different countries and cultures, there was very little difference in the hierarchy, at least in its lower tiers. This makes sense, right? Sure, a different culture might place self-actualization lower on the figure, or not at all, since different places look at individualism differently, but at the end of the day, we all need food. This also isn't the final version of this model. It would go on to be expanded into a more balanced circle of 7 essential needs, but the most famous version remains the hierarchical version. However, as you might have noticed, there are a couple logical flaws in this hierarchy idea. For one thing, most of us can name unhealthy people who have a lot of community, or vice versa, and therefore, the order of these tiers is perhaps less concrete than they seem. Also, this chart puts things like friendship and love above freedom or respect, and that's not wrong per se. However, it is fairly subjective. All of those ideas are important, but are they definitively ordered in that way? It's because of these nuances that many other scientists criticize Maslow for modeling his hierarchy off personal philosophy versus recorded psychology. And they were absolutely right, because, I should elaborate, these are, in Maslow's eyes, the standards of living necessary for being a human. And to Maslow, some people like the sick, the crippled, the disabled, and the homeless, weren't human. They were just problems. Trying to apply the hierarchy of needs to them was foolish because trying to do that would imply a fallibility to his beliefs, a responsibility to the ethics of his work that he was unwilling to take. But let's come back to that. The other famous idea attached to this controversial figure is Maslow's hammer, and that one's a lot more simple. Essentially, all it is a framework of thinking. When the only tool you have is a hammer, every problem looks like a nail. But as a human with needs and wants and fallibilities, many of our problems are with ourselves more than with the world. Some people have all kinds of tools at their disposal, plenty of ways to deal with the hardships of being alive. They have those things which are higher on the hierarchy of needs. They have a support system, freedom, people and ideas that they're loyal to. Some people have only themselves, and a hammer. All things considered, this is a video about self-mutilation, and I hope this hurts. Identity is really interesting as a concept. It's dynamic and incorporeal, subjectively assigned by whichever person is considering it based on whatever experience or lack thereof they've had with the identity's projector, or in other words, person. We have some control over the way that people see us, but less than a lot of us would like. There's this idea I've heard thrown around a couple of times, usually referenced as some sort of Japanese proverb or ideology, that says every living human has 3 metaphorical faces. One that you show to the world, one that you show to the people you're really close with, and the true face, which is the one that you never show anyone. The person that you really are is only accessible when you're by yourself. But what if even that wasn't true? What if, for one reason or another, you decided you didn't want to know? You didn't want to be a part of your own true identity. Maybe you're ashamed of it, maybe you're embarrassed by it, or maybe you just prefer ignorance to hard realities. How would you go about escaping it? How do you run from yourself? You wake up with nothing. Literally. No money, no clothes, no idea what you're doing here, and most concerningly, no memories at all. Not of the night before, or the place you're in, or even your own identity. It's all just gone. And so opens Disco Elysium. Disco Elysium is one of my favorite books of all time, and that claim might surprise you because Disco Elysium is a role-playing game released by Zaum in 2019. The reason I kind of consider it a book is because upon release of the final cut, it contains about 1.2 million words. That's more words than the entire Lord of the Rings series, or the Bible. Now, will you read all 1.2 million of those words on your first playthrough? Well, no, it would be impossible. However, the game is such an impressive work of fiction, philosophy, criticism, satire, absurdism, and character analysis that, to me, and to a lot of the fanbase, it's essentially literature. If you've ever played an RPG, you know that there are 2 ways you'll encounter a main character. Usually they'll either be a blank slate, low to zero personality figure, maybe one you design yourself that doesn't have much in the way of identity or backstory, so you can project one onto them yourself. Or they're a fully realized character that you're meant to embody and make choices for during the short time you control them. Point is, it's kind of all or nothing with character work, which can really suck for games that are primarily about making choices. It's really hard to find a way to have a pre-existing character that you can also shape the identity of in a meaningful way without fully sidelining your major narrative. Well, Disco Elysium has solved this problem by taking inspiration from the beautiful art form that is telenovela, and by that I mean an amnesia arc. The character you play as, Lieutenant W. Frater Harrier Dubois, though you don't know his name or title at the start of the game, has partaken in, and I quote, a deluge of world-ending proportions, which means that he drank so much that he has apparently permanently erased all prior knowledge of himself and the world around him. Now, you'll go on to realize that's not fully true, that some memories and impulses have stuck around, buried under the surface, like the after images of some terrible holy light shining on your mind, but for the time being, it's not a great sign. Waking up with no memories as a result of something you did to yourself speaks of a greater pain that you're both unwilling and presently incapable of coming to terms with. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. It's a brilliant trick the game is playing. You want to know more about this Harry character that you're apparently playing, but Harry is, all things considered, a different character than the man you are. And I mean that in a lot of different ways. The amazing part about playing a character with a history he can't remember is that you get to build a new identity for yourself no matter what, as you discover, or technically rediscover, the history, geography, economy, and politics of this fictional world and decide what part you want to play in all of it. But the thing is, this new identity, it's not replacing your old identity. Choosing to start going by Raphael Ambrosius Cousteau doesn't mean that people who know you as Harry are going to stop knowing that. And in fact, it might be extra concerning to them that you've developed this new persona at all. But it's unavoidable. You as the player aren't Harry, and the game helps you out by making Harry also not Harry. This is getting confusing. Let's scale out for a second. You play as a cop in Disco Elysium, though probably not the kind of cop you're used to. Not if you live in America, at least. The main setting of the game, a fictional district called Martinez in the city of Revachol, is based, as far as I can tell, on a European country, probably most comparable to France. It's a war-torn place, one of those towns that has been ruined by history in more ways than one. That idea gets a lot of attention from the game. Your setting does a lot to inform your character's motivations, after all, and this setting is defined by an atmosphere that I can only describe as failure. The residents and buildings of Martinez are all shadowed by the failure of revolution, the failure of capitalism, the failure of morality. And that's created a space that is all at once a ticking time bomb for complete anarchy or corporatocracy, a breeding ground for violence and drug use, and also kind of a safe haven for the lost and the disenfranchised. Almost everyone who ends up in Martinez exists, yet again, as a living reminder of someone's failure. Either their own, their community's, or, in rare and heartbreaking cases, your failure. The fact that you're a cop is not helped a lot by your amnesia, other than that it allows you a fresh and somewhat insane perspective on the events that unfold around you. Part of reestablishing your personality as Harry Dubois includes also coming to terms politically with the position you hold, that being a tool of the state, or in this case specifically, the Coalition. Now, there's a lot of history in this game, like a truly insane amount. So the most important thing I can tell you about the Coalition is that they are a group of geographical powers that are a definitively conquering force, as are most governments to one degree or another when they rise to power. Martinez is a historical site of what was essentially a communist revolution, a failed one at that, and the group that it failed against was the Coalition. There was a lot of bloodshed, a lot of casualties, and it never really left the district, even when it ended. Now, some 50 or so years later, there are still people from both sides of the conflict left over, each and all of them bitter in some way about the way things went. The game isn't necessarily backing one perspective over another, too. Each person's perspective is incredibly personal, nuanced, different, and a lot of the time, contradictory. Those who fought with the Coalition are proud of their service, but angry it didn't result in anything better. Think the communards ruined things too badly, or won, or anything. The communards, also called the communists or the Mazovians, look back nostalgically at their history, reminiscing on the hope and the boldness that they had for their cause, but that nostalgia is clouded by the understanding that they failed, and that their attempts were squashed out, that capitalism truly is an overwhelming force, and by their estimations, is only going to get worse. No one's happy. No one but the foolish and the young. But that's what happens when you live in the past, right? And everyone who lives in Martinez lives in the past. Harry used to live in the past too, which is why he drank so much that he couldn't anymore. Every new piece of information you learn about the world is satisfying in how it helps you piece back together your identity and solve the mystery. However, those moments are also tinged with sadness and a sort of unplaceable dread as you get closer and closer to becoming the person you were before the drinking. Was your deluge a positive or a negative? Well, like most of the questions presented by this game, it's subjective and mostly rhetorical. The real question we should be asking, or maybe avoiding, is why did Harry do this to himself in the first place? Who the hell is Dolores Day? What is he running from? Well, he's running from the very thing all of the people of Martinez have been living in. His past.
But let's break away from Harry for a bit and talk about someone who's running from their future.
Allow me to introduce you all to Owen. I Saw the TV Glow by Jane Schoenbrunn is one of the best movies I've seen this year, horror or otherwise. It's a fantastic story scored by Alex G, who knocks it out of the park with nostalgic synths and keys, elevated by a brightly colored and thoughtfully composed atmosphere and scene design. It, like Disco Elysium, manages to feel hopeful and hopeless all at once, and the driving factor behind this feeling is Owen. Owen is quiet, low energy, timid. They have trouble speaking to people, even their family and friends. They don't have strong opinions on things, they don't make bold choices, don't like having to lie to people. They're happier, or that's the wrong word, more comfortable living passively, letting life happen to them, not really participating. The only thing they do feel strongly about is their favorite show, the Pink Opaque, the one they were introduced to when they were just a freshman in high school by their one real friend, Maddie. It's really interesting watching I Saw the TV Glow for the first time because even from the get-go, we're not totally certain where we exist in the narrative as an audience. Owen is talking to us directly, telling us a story about starting the show back up after years of not watching, but who is actually being spoken to? Owen is sitting alone in the woods by a fire, a line of smoke rising like a dark beacon, and the scene is gentle, the words quiet. It's intimate here. We're being spoken to like we already know a part of the story, and though we go back in time to the beginning, it already feels off, starting in a place like this. We can dismiss things like this as just artistic movie tropes, a way to easily give exposition, and normally that might be okay, but there's more to it this time, and you probably understand that before the film even starts, just by reading its name. Sometimes a trope is a trope, but this is a visual story about visual stories. Tropes might not be tropes, they might be commentaries. Why is Owen speaking to a void? So, spoiler time, Owen is not in our reality, though it takes us a while to figure that out. That show that Owen is obsessed with, the Pink Opaque, that's the real world, and knowing that, we begin to understand why Owen has such a fixation on the show. It's where they're from. Let's talk about the show a bit. The Pink Opaque is an in-universe Monster of the Week show, like Buffy or Supernatural. Every episode is about the protagonists, two high school-aged girls named Tara and Isabel, fighting different supernatural entities. These entities tend to serve as most of the visual horror in the movie, with their surreal, practical designs and their oddly choreographed movements. In each of these episodes, Tara and Isabel, who never actually meet and communicate psychically somehow, are fighting to stop the overarching villain behind it all, the man in the moon, Mr. Melancholy. Mr. Melancholy isn't given too much description, but we do see him a bit in the early parts of the movie as simply a face in the moon, like in the 1902 sci-fi film A Trip to the Moon. Apparently, Mr. Melancholy is desperate to stop the team of girls, the titular Pink Opaque, and the way he intends to do that is by capturing them and sending them to the enigmatic Midnight Realm. We have no idea what the Midnight Realm actually is. The plot might seem vague and non-specific, and that's fine. The actual content of every episode doesn't really matter. What does matter is that during Owen's time in school, the show ended abruptly, cancelled out of nowhere, on the same day that Maddie, Owen's best and only friend, disappeared. And then, Owen just moved on. The final episode of The Pink Opaque was dark. Isabel was supposed to meet up with Tara in person to finally try and defeat Mr. Melancholy, but when she got to the camp where the showdown was supposed to happen, she realized she was too late. Tara had already been buried alive. Isabel is captured and taken to Mr. Melancholy, where he tells her, time moves quickly, and I Saw the TV Glow, to such a degree that it sometimes feels like a dark joke. When we cut a few years from the introductory scene and see the child actor for Owen lengthen out into the full adult form of Justice Smith, who's supposed to still be in high school, it's kind of unbelievable. Time doesn't really move like that. This change happens so suddenly, but what we don't know is that that's the point. It's a weird artistic inconsistency, just like Owen speaking at the fire, but like that, we don't know what it means. It's years later. Owen is working in a grocery store, still the same quiet, timid figure, and without warning, Maddie appears again. Owen is happy about this and wants to know where she's been, but something is clearly off about her. She's older, sure, but there's a frantic intensity to her that we haven't quite seen before. She has something important to tell Owen. It's one of my favorite scenes in the movie, Owen and Maddie's reunion. It takes place in this punky dive bar that happens to have Phoebe Bridgers performing alongside the band Sloppy Jane. The song they sing here, Claw Machine, gets stuck in my head all the time. Like I said, the score for this movie kicks ass. But the main focus of the scene is Maddie and Owen speaking at the bar. She asks Owen if time seems to be moving faster than it should, and yes, it has been. Maybe Owen doesn't see it, but we, the audience, do. The odd pacing. It's a part of it, isn't it? Maddie asks if Owen ever feels like they're narrating their own life to the world. the fire. It's that. That's what Maddie's talking about. These artistic filmmaking moments, they're not for us. They're actually happening as a part of Owen and Maddie's lived experience. Like they're actually in a movie or TV show in their real lives. It's at this moment that Maddie reveals to Owen that, in fact, this place, the bar, the city, the world, all of it is the Midnight Realm. The actual reality is the show, their show, the Pink Opaque. The conversation continues at Owen and Maddie's old school, in an astronomy projection dome, and it's here that Maddie delivers a long and powerful monologue explaining where she ran away to all of those years ago, her discovery of the falseness of her life, and why she buried herself alive, just like Tara. After she did, she woke up in the Pink Opaque as her true self, as Tara. And as we learn this, it becomes shockingly clear that Isabel, the other person who was captured and had her heart removed, sent to the Midnight Realm, is Owen. Mr. Melancholy told Isabel to just give up, that the poison he was feeding her was so good she wouldn't even know she was dying. And all of Owen's life has been that poison dream. Isabel is buried alive in the Pink Opaque, her strength gone and her reality warped. This life that Owen has been passively attached to, barely participating in, just along for the tiresome and intimidating ride, isn't real life. It's just an illusion Isabel is seeing as she suffocates to death underground. Maddie, or Tara, stresses to Owen, or Isabel, that she's dying, and the only way to stop this death from taking place is by doing the insanely scary thing that Maddie has already done, burying themselves alive. And soon, like tonight, there's no time to wait, Isabel is dying. And now, what is Owen gonna do about it? Fuck. It's really hard to force someone to do something they don't want to do, especially if they feel like they have another option, however destructive or nonsensical that option is. Cowardice is an incredibly human flaw, and an incredibly dangerous one at that. Cowardice is what gets the people you're supposed to be taking care of hurt. Cowardice gets you hurt. Cowardice in the face of a mistake or a bad action is potentially the worst kind, because if you avoid those consequences, they have a way of hunting you down, and they'll go through whoever's around to get to you. It's honestly better, even under the worst, most humiliating or incriminating of circumstances, to just take responsibility. Mouthwashing is a story about someone who refuses to do this. In Mouthwashing, the story is told to you out of order. The very first thing you do in the game is intentionally crash the spaceship you and your crew are working on, the Tulpar, into an oncoming asteroid. As you do this, you're haunted by the mascot of the company you're working for, the Pony Express Shipping Company, a strange cartoonish horse named Polly. We don't know who we are in this opening scene, or any of the other characters in the game really, but all evidence points to us being the captain of the ship, Curly. Who else would, or could, do something like this? As the crash occurs, we have a lot of questions, but the main one is simply, why? Why did Curly crash the ship? Why was he seeing Polly in the halls? What happened here to cause this sequence of events? The rest of the game clears this up for us in a series of disconnected events, jumping back and forth in the timeline from the days and months after the crash, where the crew is slowly starving and going crazy waiting for rescue, to the days leading up to it, where we get a better idea of the original dynamic of the group. During the scenes before the crash, we tend to play as the captain, Curly, and after the crash, we play as the character Jimmy, who was originally Curly's co-pilot but has taken on leadership duties in the face of Curly's condition. See, during the crash, Curly was horrifically injured. He lost his hands and feet and what looks like most of his skin. He can't move or talk or really do anything other than moan in pain. Anya, the ship's medical officer, is doing the best she can to keep him comfortable with painkillers, however, she is woefully underprepared and inexperienced. When Jimmy confronts Anya about her abilities, it becomes clear that she isn't exactly as capable as someone of her position should be. However, there might be something else going on. She seems exceptionally intimidated by Jimmy, who does act, admittedly, pretty aggressively. We can discount most of this as Jimmy being distressed about the situation and trying to be an effective leader, but there's a sharpness, almost a cruelty behind his words when he speaks to his crew. Especially Curly, who he typically ends up being the one to administer medication for. He clearly has to manually shove the pills down Curly's throat, and every time he does, we get the feeling that Jimmy is blaming Curly for all of this, which I suppose makes sense. Curly is the one who crashed the ship and put all of them in this situation to begin with. The rest of the crew, after the crash, are in pretty bad states. Daisuke, the younger mechanic's apprentice who's just interning on the ship, has a kind of naive optimism about him that eventually the crew will get rescued and this will just be a cool story that'll get them all lots of fame and attention. The main mechanic, a jaded and aggressive man named Swansea, is a lot less happy about the turn of events. All of the crew, Curly included, are just kind of stuck, waiting for something to happen, all of them quietly cursing Curly for putting them in this situation. But again, what actually happened? Why did Curly crash the ship? Jumping back to earlier in the timeline, everyone's relationship with each other appears to be better. Swansea's still a hard ass, but it's not dangerous in the way it will become. Daisuke's a little foolish, but he's young, he'll grow out of it. Anya and Jimmy still seem to have some issues with each other, but it seems like Jimmy just isn't much of a people person. Most shocking of all, though, is the fact that everyone seems to respect and actually like Curly. As we play as him, solving minor problems and doing our best to keep the ship running smoothly, it seems rather unlikely that someone as responsible and charming as Curly would do something as dramatic as getting the ship destroyed. But there's one possibility. At a certain point in the game, not too long before the crash happens, you as Curly have to inform the crew that after this mission, they're all losing their jobs. This information comes at a rather unfortunate time. Curly had just had a conversation with Jimmy where he admitted that despite the profits and promotions Curly has worked through, he just doesn't know if this job is right for him anymore. Now that the truth is coming out, Jimmy explodes, claiming Curly already knew it was happening, and complains how unfair it is that Curly will be able to provide and manage for himself after this mission. But the rest of them will be more or less screwed. Daisuke has the safety net of family wealth, but Jimmy and Anya have no fallback plan, and Swansea is getting too old to continue working. A lot of blame is pushed around the table, mostly towards Curly, and Jimmy is the one doing most of the pushing. After we play through the scene, we get the idea that maybe out of shame, or maybe in some bid to save his crew from their struggles, Curly tried to crash the ship, killing them all, but failed. It would explain why Jimmy seems so upset at Curly, why he feels so put upon by the responsibility of being a leader now. It was forced upon him. He hates having things forced upon him. Most of us do. We're getting crazy. Yeah! James Sunderland is a coward. All things considered. Sure, he fights monsters and endures horrifying scenes in the strange town of Silent Hill, but cowardice doesn't always look the same. James goes to Silent Hill after receiving a letter from his dead wife, Mary, telling him she's waiting for him there. James, at this point in the story, knows more than the game lets on about the fate of his wife, but we learn fairly quickly that she's dead, died due to some disease, and even though James acknowledges this, he still seeks out Silent Hill. There is an inherently flawed element to this logic, but it might not be the flaw you're thinking. James isn't going to Silent Hill to make peace with his wife, like he thinks. He's there to make peace with himself. Or die trying. The interesting thing about James is that, especially as a protagonist, he seems to operate with an at least passively good morality system, and yet there's a coldness to him and his actions, a reservation that makes us distrust him. The issue isn't that he's done anything wrong, at least that we know about. The issue is that he's behaving like he has. He's gentle and apologetic like someone who's trying to make peace with something, and avoidant like he doesn't want to get found out. But found out for what? Silent Hill, at least as it appears in Silent Hill 2, is apparently a real place, one that James and his late wife visited during the happier times in their relationship. There's a history to the place, both on a large scale with stories of banished lovers and tragedies in the water, and personally, between James and his wife, memories shared together with a similar kind of banished love. And yet, James seems distracted or confused by his time in Silent Hill, even before things get overtly paranormal. James doesn't remember things about the town, or rather his history, that don't make sense to forget. When Mary writes James the letter asking him to meet her here, she says that she's waiting in their special place. A special place that James can't seem to recall. Is he that bad of a husband that he doesn't remember what is apparently an important location to his wife? Or is there something more happening? A repression? There's an observation you start making during your playthrough of Silent Hill 2, probably a little later in, about the design of the world and the creatures within it. The monsters, with their oddly sexualized appearances, mouths and lips and rocking bed frames, lots of cages, flicking tongues. The world, with this strange insistence that at some point, yes, regular work and life existed here, but now, all that remains is a hellish puzzle box, these nonsensical rooms and nightmare dimensions and incredibly pointed allegorical puzzle solving. All of this is for James, isn't it? James and a few other unfortunate souls. Silent Hill is shaping itself around the experiences of those foolish or crazy enough to enter, and it's shaping them violently and personally. James is not the only person in Silent Hill when he arrives. Very early on, we meet an emotional and seemingly dazed woman named Angela, searching for her mother in quite the same way that James is looking for his wife. Later, we also meet Eddie, an unstable and emotionally volatile man who seems to have come to the town fleeing a murder. Our encounters with these characters are always strange, and the deeper we get into the story, the more we begin to notice that these characters are talking about and reacting to things we simply cannot see. Silent Hill is appearing differently to them, and it's appearing to them violently, the very worst of their impulses and beliefs being dragged into a surreal spotlight. So, if Silent Hill is changing to suit the perspective of whichever inhabitant is experiencing it, what is the explanation for all the strange things James is seeing? What is the explanation for Maria? What is the world trying to tell him? Had just about enough. You're still getting audio? Oh yeah. In Mouthwashing, every once in a while, these little scenes with text on them pop up, usually in some kind of response to interactions on the Tulpar. They're vague, ominous, and tend to have a deeper insight into what's actually going on than we as the player do. When we're playing as Jimmy, the text, "Take responsibility," keeps showing up. Take responsibility for what? For the crew? We're trying to do that, but it's difficult with Swansea distrusting us, with Curly judging us, with Anya afraid of us. Getting a story out of order the way you do in Mouthwashing, you start to wonder what time is hiding from you. Maybe we got it wrong. Maybe the responsibility we're supposed to be taking is for something else. Wouldn't there be a reason for the rest of the crew, save for Daisuke, to dislike or distrust us? Hell, I only think Daisuke is being nice because that's either just who he is or he's a little too naive to realize... What? To realize what? Owen is trans. It's never said overtly, but it would take a special kind of not paying attention to miss the subtext of the film. There's evidence to this fact scattered throughout, including shots of Owen experimenting with more feminine clothing, a heavy inclusion of bright pinks, whites, and blues, the traditional colors of the trans flag, and scenes where Owen is depicted in a dual nature with her true counterpart, Isabel. Truthfully though, it's the narrative that is the strongest indicator of this allegory. Owen's struggle to realize her own identity as Isabel from the Pink Opaque is a metaphorical depiction of someone's struggle to realize their own gender identity in the face of terrifying odds. And they are terrifying. Owen's mother growing up seemed to be the only kind face Owen ever had around her. Her father was cold, cruel, and seems disgusted by Owen's mere presence, especially after her mother's death. The school Owen attended ostracized her one and only friend for being a lesbian so badly that not only did it lead up to her running away, stealing Owen's only real friend and connection to the real world, but it taught Owen that being yourself is dangerous and leads to getting hurt. So Owen doesn't do anything. It's tragic once you understand the true narrative of this film, watching how much the Pink Opaque means to Owen, how much of a source of comfort it is. Owen is constantly looking through some strange glowing mirror at a version of herself where she's happy, beautiful, strong, and self-assured. She wants it so bad. She's drawn to it in a way that she could never describe, but it's too scary. What if she's wrong? What if she can't take it back later? What if things get worse than they already are now? In the face of this subtext, Maddie's explanation about burying yourself alive becomes that much more pointed and dramatic, as we realize what it actually means. To return to the Pink Opaque, and by that logic to become Isabel, or become her again, Owen has to take a leap of faith. And for obvious reasons, she has a lot of doubts. In almost any situation, regardless of your circumstances, it can be really hard to accept a part of yourself that you've never looked at, or that others might chastise or hurt you for. It's even harder to acknowledge it publicly, but in the long term, you have to know it's going to get better for you. You have to try, because otherwise one day you'll wake up and realize you've missed out on what could have been happiness. Owen doesn't do it. The last time she sees Maddie, as they're walking to bury themselves again, it becomes too much for Owen. She pushes her away, literally, and sprints full speed in the other direction. It's just like that moment all those years ago when Owen ran from Maddie as a kid, after she told her that they should run away, try to be happier. Owen was just too scared. It feels cruel to call Owen a coward when the only person she's hurting is herself, but...
There will be a fucking reckoning. There will be a reckoning. We're still going, baby boy.
A long time ago, approximately 6 years ago, Harry's fiancée, Dora Ingerland, left him. She was everything to Harry, his motivation and his muse. Throughout Disco Elysium, we're constantly hearing about this religious and political figure, Dolores Day, a dead and gone entity of immense power, history, terror, and beauty that Harry cannot seem to stop thinking about. He thinks the world of her, even if he's terrified of her. Through his drunken amnesia, he cannot place why this strangely intimidating and angelic figure is lingering in his mind. Well, it is because to Harry, Dora was Dolores Day. Larger than life, infallible, a living work of art around which all beauty revolved and all personal inadequacies died. And what happens when the thing you've based your life, your happiness, your entire reality around leaves you? Well, I guess we know why Harry was drinking. After the crash, the crew of the Tulpar began to run out of food. It's a classic stranded story. Because of this, everybody starts getting desperate. They break into the cargo hold of their ship, hoping against hope that whatever they're shipping might be edible, and are disappointed to learn that they're hauling a truly massive amount of mouthwash, hence the title of the game. This discovery is bittersweet. Sure, they can't really feed themselves with the mouthwash, but they can sure drink it! Woo! Things go from bad to worse at the point where the crew finally runs out of real foods and are forced to start drinking the mouthwash exclusively. All of them seem to know it won't help them and that it will probably make their experience worse, but that's the thing about desperation. It doesn't always follow a steady stream of logic. I describe the consumption of mouthwash as the beginning of the end, were I not dreadfully aware of everything that came before it. But that raises an interesting question. What was the point of no return? Was it when the crash happened? When the shipment was ordered? When the crew was hired? Was this descent into madness doomed to happen, or did something happen on the ship beforehand that locked them into some kind of downward spiral? Why did Curly crash the ship? What is the world trying to tell James? Or rather, remind him of? The interesting thing about a personal mystery narrative, one where something is hidden from the protagonist, is how, dramatically, the most satisfying conclusion is a sort of coming to terms moment with a piece of lost information, not one that the protagonist never had. Look at it this way. A Sherlock Holmes mystery solution doesn't have to be specifically based around the detective's life, because more often than not, the case isn't really about him. He's just a valuable instrument to solve it. But in something like Silent Hill, or really any of the stories we're talking about tonight, where the mystery is deeply connected to the character experiencing it, it could be unsatisfying to simply stumble upon a disconnected solution, whatever that might be. For example, if the ending of Silent Hill 2 revealed that before her death, Mary made some kind of pact with an ancient god or something to be revived in some strange, hellish dimension, and that was the explanation for what Silent Hill is and why Mary is trying to reach out to James, that could be interesting, but it would also sort of diminish all the time we spent as James. The story stops being about him and starts looking something more like Resident Evil 7, a simple wife quest where you're just a tool solving a problem caused by something completely unrelated to you. But that's not what Silent Hill is about. From very early into our playthrough, we can tell, even as our story intersects with others, that this has to do with us, James. And even still, we are still a tool, just a more destructive one. A hammer, hitting every nail it can find, violently bashing its problems into submission. When all you have is a hammer. Not every problem is a nail. You can't fix a broken window or a leaky pipe by bashing it with the same numbing force. To truly solve the problem, you have to use different implements, approach from a different angle, and most of all, acknowledge that there's a problem to begin with. Maybe it's time to start looking for different tools, even if you're used to just using the hammer. As the chalk on the pavement reads, there is still time, but there won't be forever. Owen is too scared to drop the hammer. Owen knows she can't fix the window with the hammer, so she boards it up instead. There, now no one can tell if the window is broken or not. Owen bashes the leaky pipe closed. It's useless now, but at least it's not leaking. The saddest and yet most effective part of I Saw the TV Glow is watching Owen fail. Failure seems to be a running theme for these stories. The failure to win, to move on, to take responsibility, and now just to be. Because Owen never buries herself. Never does the scary thing that it would take to become herself again. She never sees Maddie, or I guess Tara, ever again, even though she keeps waiting. Time passes quicker than it should, a byproduct of this nightmare that looks like reality. Owen becoming a bystander to her own life, trying to convince herself she's happy and satisfied. A family we never see, a decay that lingers over the years until horribly, Owen's entire life has passed her by in the span of what feels like minutes, both as a viewer of the film and as Owen. Simply existing is painful for Owen because Owen is still really Isabel, no matter how hard she tries to deny it, and Isabel is suffocating. And for one dreadful, terrifying, reality-shattering moment at work, as random a place as any, Owen acknowledges it. Just once, and never again. But the one time is horrible. Owen screams for help, for acknowledgement, for her mother to save her. She's dying, she can't breathe, but no one can save her, or could, because she's done it to herself. She could have saved herself, she could have changed things if she just lived with herself, acknowledged the truth, took responsibility for her own happiness, but she didn't. It was too hard. And as the film ends, it seems like she never will. As things fall apart on the ship, we start to get some answers. Jumping back and forth in the timeline really helps, but everything starts to come together as we, in the perspective of Curly, learn that Anya is pregnant. It's clearly not Curly's. Swansea and Daisuke seem unlikely, which leaves... There's probably a reason Anya treats Jimmy the way she does. Placatingly, like she's terrified of him, but doesn't even want him to know. There's a reason Jimmy seems so high-strung, so desperate to maintain control. Jesus. Jimmy, what did you do? I'm not certain whether the game ever says outright what actually happened between Anya and Jimmy, but based on what we learned from here, I think we can safely assume that the interaction was not consensual. Which leads me to my next point. We've spent so much time thinking that Curly was the reason the ship crashed, but what if there's more to it than that? In every scene where we play as Curly, all before the crash, he's illustrated to be kind, rational, well-respected, and seemingly interested in the well-being of his whole crew. Clearly, at some point, something must have changed to drive the story to where it is now, and we've been assuming that was the guilt of the crew getting fired, but this information about Anya changes things. Not because it gives Curly less of a reason to crash the ship, which some might argue it does, but because it gives someone else more of a reason to. Jimmy. Jimmy's violence towards Anya was a horrible thing, but it was something that he could deny, or even recontextualize for himself, making himself still the good guy somehow. However, this pregnancy changes things. Even under the best of circumstances, getting someone pregnant in space is a dangerous breach of responsibility for a number of reasons, but of course, further than that, it'll be clear evidence of his crime. First to the crew, and then to everyone else when they reach their destination. And Jimmy, like everyone we've been talking about here tonight, to one degree or another, is a coward. So he tries to take the easy way out. There are moments in Disco Elysium where you feel doomed, and a lot of the time you don't really know why. There's a pain in Harry, multiple really, that all stem from the same part of his life he can't remember, but he feels anyway. The tragedy of Disco Elysium is that it shows what happens after you take the easy way out. In this case, leaning on your addictions to forget your pain. Physically, Harry is clearly deteriorating. He's in pain, he looks sickly, his mind is obviously affected, but emotionally, it's arguably worse. Everything Harry encounters is filtered through memories he can't even access, through pain he doesn't want to acknowledge, and so reality, all of it, even the parts of it that have nothing to do with what Harry was experiencing, becomes hell. All of it some watercolor mirror through which Harry's hidden parts can reflect back at himself, creating the vision of a monster Harry cannot recognize but knows is himself. The person you really are, as well as the person you've been, are inseparable from your image of yourself, no matter how bad you want to pretend they're not. Harry wants to be someone without pain, but he's trying to board up a broken window instead of acknowledging the break, just like Owen, who wants to be someone without complication. Owen and Harry are both running in the same direction, but is it worse for Harry, who knows what nightmare he'll encounter once the creature catches up with him? Or Owen, who doesn't, but is too scared to find out? The difference between the two is that we know what happens to Owen, know how she fails. Harry, on the other hand, can go plenty of different directions. There are multiple endings to the game, all reliant on how you behaved yourself and what you paid attention to. Sure, in some versions it seems Harry is unwilling to change, just like everyone else, and that his death is just on the horizon, likely by his own hand, through more drug and alcohol use or possibly something more dramatic. But in other versions, it's not so bad. Sure, a lot of the damage is already done, but it's not over. Maybe you got sober. Maybe you realized something about yourself that changes your mind. Maybe your connection to someone you met during the story gives you something else to focus on. I spent a long time talking about this game, and I haven't even mentioned your partner Kim, who is my favorite character of the game. If you work hard and you really examine your situation, it's possible to take responsibility. Everyone dies in mouthwashing. Everyone but Curly. You could say it was a result of the mouthwash, but honestly, it's been coming since before then. Anya has been deteriorating mentally for a while, for many reasons. After a certain point, she just can't take it anymore. No one can get to her while she freaks out, so Daisuke tries to get to her through the vents and is badly injured, causing a manic Swansea to put him out of his misery. With the two most positive forces on the ship gone, madness reigns. Jimmy and Swansea begin to chase each other around the ship, the both of them seeing and hearing things as a result of the mouthwash poisoning that are not there. Jimmy keeps getting flashes to take responsibility, and I don't even know what he thinks that would be anymore. He shoots Swansea. It's just Jimmy and Curly left at this point, and I think we understand the whole story. Jimmy assaulted Anya, and after she became pregnant, he started to panic. Curly knew about Anya's pregnancy and likely knew the circumstances, but wanted to try to resolve things peacefully. He didn't want to consider that his friend, Jimmy, could do something so horrible. He also knew how bad things could get if Jimmy found out about the pregnancy, clearly recognizing the irresponsible streak in his friend, so he told Anya not to tell Jimmy, that they deal with it later together. Anya, already beginning to break down for understandable reasons, doesn't do this. Jimmy couldn't take the pressure and admitted as much to Curly. He said there was still a way to look like good guys, to be considered heroes. It seems like Curly didn't understand what Jimmy meant, that crashing the ship, killing them all, would hide his actions and that their legacy would never be tarnished, until it was too late. Curly may have tried to stop the collision, but during this, the impact happened, but no one died. Curly couldn't talk, so Jimmy rewrote the story again, just as he'd been trying to do, and made himself the good guy. Except no one believed him, and at heart, he wasn't the good guy. So it all went to shit anyway. Jimmy is in a consistent downward spiral, making a bad decision and trying to cover it up with an equally bad or worse decision. And the whole time, he convinces himself that he's doing what's right, taking responsibility. But he's wrong. Killing everyone solves nothing, it just hurts more people. Obviously, taking lead of the ship after the crash also might feel responsible, but not as responsible as admitting what you've done and allowing someone else to start making decisions. But at this point, it doesn't even matter. The damage has been done, and yet he's still trying to fix it, and badly. The final parts of the game push Jimmy's failure to recognize his own torturous cycle to their extreme, as Jimmy becomes fixated on keeping Curly alive, when at this point, I'm not even certain that's what Curly would want. He mutilates Curly further so that he can have more control over him, so that he can feed Curly parts of himself to keep him sustained, even though it's clearly horrible for Curly. Jimmy just can't admit when it's time to stop. Even at the end, putting Curly in a life pod, hoping against hope that at some point someone might discover and save him, Jimmy still can't acknowledge what he's done, or maybe he does, but he can't live with it. The game ends with Curly being put into cryo-sleep as Jimmy takes yet another easy way out off to the side, a single gunshot punctuating the end of the game. When you can't tell the truth about what you've done, it stays with you. It becomes everything that you are. Like a cancer left untreated, it starts as a small part of you but expands corrosively, eating everything that you are and have until the ecosystem that is you and your reality can't sustain itself and everything goes. The things we hide are the things that kill us. Mary didn't die of that disease. She had it, for sure, but that's not what I'm saying. Really, it was James. By the time it happened, Mary had been changed into something that wasn't her, just a vessel of pain and regret. She could barely move, barely think, and had been hinting for James that she was ready for the pain to go away. She wanted the easy way out. Or at least, that's how James has to frame it for himself, as the memories come back. This thing he did, suffocating his wife, he can call it a mercy or he can call it a murder, but no matter what, he did it, and now it's coming back to him. This strange, hopeless hope that had been lingering in his heart ever since receiving that message from Mary dies when he remembers that he ended her life. Was he selfish? Maybe. Plenty of parts of the game imply that James was dissatisfied being the husband of a terminal patient. No one gets into a relationship hoping to become their partner's caretaker in that way, to outlast them and watch them turn into a husk. It's horrible. One of the worst things a person can experience, but it's also his wife. He wouldn't be wandering around through this town if she was someone he didn't care about, and so the action is hard to analyze. The game doesn't spell out every factor of the decision, it just reminds you that it happened, and then leaves James to make a choice based off of that realization. Quite like in Disco Elysium, depending on the way you play and little micro choices you make, you can get different endings, some of which are worse, more doomed than others. On my first playthrough, when I was unaware of how certain actions influence this ending, I got the in-water ending, an ending that might arguably be the most depressing in the game. I don't know how I feel about it, if I'd call it the true ending, but it is certainly keeping with one of the themes of this essay. James, once he realizes the truth of what he's done, regardless of why he's done it, decides that either he can't live with the knowledge of what he's done, or without his wife. And once again, he takes the easy way out. Now, I've been saying the easy way out a lot, but to be clear, it's not that easy to do something as drastic as the things I'm talking about in this essay. Ending one's own life, or the lives of others, are not decisions that people tend to make lightly. However, if you're acting immaturely, as all of the protagonists of these stories are, those options are certainly simpler. It's just the ultimate blow-off. Being dead, or the emotional equivalent, cuts you off from experiencing any kind of responsibility for what happens around you. But the key word there is experience. Of course, even if you're not feeling it, can't see the way it hurts the others around you, it's still your fault. It still happened. It's still your history. Jimmy still assaulted Anya. Owen is still Isabel. Harry was still left by Dora, and James still killed his wife. You can dance around it, you can hide it from yourself or the world, but that doesn't change the objective truth of what happened. When all you have is a hammer, be that hammer a bottle of alcohol or mouthwash, a glowing TV, or just two hands with a known capacity for violence, every problem looks like a nail. But that doesn't mean that every problem is a nail. It just means you're going to break a lot of stuff. And it's going to hurt. Thanks for watching.